Hello, everyone. It is my pleasure once again to bring to you someone who is really distinguished, someone who has accomplished a lot in his field of work, which is really what I like to do here every week. So it's my pleasure to do that once again. Today, my guest is none other than Dr. Joseph Unufegan of the University of Toronto, who joins us today from Toronto, Canada. Dr. Unufegan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Ohiro. It's nice to be in your platform, and you've been doing a lot of good work job, and I think that it's a great opportunity to appear the same program with you.
Thank you for that. You almost just made me blush, except that nobody would have realized that I was blushing, but I thank you for being here. And, we can spend a lot of time just talking about other things. It has become necessary to really address problems across our world in the way that we really haven't. So one of the reasons I wanted you to come here and talk really has to do with the fact that your area really of scholarship is international development. So my first question to you then will be, what is international development as distinct from international relations as a study?
Oh, thank you very much for this great question to start this conversation. International relation is the study of the interactions of the actors in international politics. And these actors takes the form of states and not states, like the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, Amnesty International. And then the focus of international relations is on international politics, diplomacy, foreign policy, international law, and international economies. So on the other hand, international development, you can see, is a branch of international relations because it focuses on the pursuit of issues around reduction of poverty, achieving development, Millennium Development Goals. The issue of international development actually gained more prominence after the Bretton Woods institutions was established after the Second World War. So during that period, they now try to focus on social justice around poverty, inequality, oppression, empowerment, environmental problem. So to put it very simply, international relations is the bigger umbrella, and under international relations, you have issues like diplomacy, international development, and actually international communications.
I actually find that distinction very interesting, and it also makes me want to ask this question, because international development then is about addressing social problems and as they impact human beings, really. Yes. Instead of state action. But in international relations, then we have aligned nations and non-aligned nations. It seems to me that if we are to be responsible as human beings, international development will require then that none of us can be non-aligned. In other words, we have to have not just a focus, but have to have some responsibility to the people that occupy our space, the space called world. Therefore, international development in that sense will really focus on addressing the plight of people around the world. You get what I'm saying? Therefore, non-aligned nations as a concept would not be a primary interest for international development.
Yes, when you're talking about international development, there is no country that is isolated. And so international development initially was actually focused on the differential between, in terms of international development, between the developed countries the developing country, and the least developed countries. So there is no way, whether you are aligned or not, that issues of development does not affect you. So when we are looking at international development in the whole space, you are looking at anything that has to do with social justice, be it environmental, whether or not you are non-aligned, environmental issues affect you. So you will have to be part of the conversation, because the issues of climate change, for instance, which is also part of the international development issues, is affecting everybody, whether you belong to the United Nations organization or whether you just want to stay on your own. So these issues are central, and no country is an island. So they have to be part of this conversation at some point in time.
Thank you for that. I really like that, because it holds us all to account. It makes us all think of our responsibilities then to one another. But last year, I actually had the privilege of hosting you at the Integrative Ruminations Conference that we had in the spring of last year, which we are not able to have this year because of COVID-19. And I was really, I must tell you that I was fascinated by your paper that you presented there on poverty alleviation in Nigeria. Your focus was on re-examining the strategies that had been used up to that point in addressing poverty alleviation. So it leads me to ask one question, but three subsets of one question. Number one, why did you choose to get your doctorate in international development? And number two, you can answer all of them together. Number two, why did you choose to be interested in poverty? And number three, why Nigeria?
Okay. First of all, I will start with the last question, which is why Nigeria? I am originally from Nigeria, even though I'm now a Canadian citizen. Charity begins at home. So, and the issue of poverty as it relates to Nigeria, you know that the Nigeria as a country is now be regarded as one of the poverty capitals of the world. It has overtaken India, which used to be the World Cup poverty capital. If you take into consideration the fact that the population of India is 7 times that of Nigeria, and then Nigeria has in absolute number more people living in extreme poverty than in India, that would drive home the point of why this issue of poverty is very close to my heart. And now let me go back to your first question, which is, why did I choose this field? I did my master's program at the Graduate School of International Development, Nagoya University, Japan. And I was interested in the development model adopted by Japan that rapidly transformed her into a strong economic power after the catastrophic defeat in the Second World War. And I wanted to know what lessons Nigeria could possibly learn from this experience. That was my main reasons for choosing international development. And I know you are going to ask me on the next question, oh, what did you learn from that experience? So let me preempt you, because yes. And then the studying in Japan and living there for over 15 years, it was really clear to me that one of the things they did that really helped Japan to achieve that rapid transformation after the Second World War was that they had good education. The adult literacy rate, that is people who are 15 plus, in Japan is 99.0%. So education was already very solidly based. So it was very easy for them to take off from that point, even after the destruction. Another thing that was really very useful and that helped Japan was that they had successful economic reform by the government. The government body was principally concerned with industrial policy in Japan, and they had a Ministry of Industry, which stimulated private growth and introduced regulations that helped them take off. And Japan also had a very high savings rate and extraordinary ability to spend on infrastructure. And if you know that Japan is not that rich in resources, and that in spite of the fact that they didn't have that resources, but they were able to grow, that shows you the importance of the human resource, which can be tied again to the education. Of course, their culture of obedience and sacrifice for the good of the group was one other big thing that helped Japan. And of course, it had, I must say that it had few minorities. So in that case, it's a homogeneous society, and they were able to have strong central policies. All right. So now poverty, like I said before, I'm mixing them up in the order of answering the questions. I hope they all fall into the three questions that you asked. My interest in poverty was actually started when I worked with People's Bank of Nigeria before I traveled for my graduate studies in Japan in 1996. Having worked in that People's Bank, an organization that was set up by the federal government in the late 1980s to provide microcredit to the less privileged member of the society who had no collateral security to obtain loan from the conventional banks. It gave me a clear idea as to how really poor and how the suffering that Nigerian people who are so vulnerable were exposed to, because we have to go into villages to try to retrieve the loan and see the living condition that people were living in. So this is so terrible, because that I started to have of course I'm from a poor home, but I cannot classify myself as the poorest of the poor, but poor in any case, because I knew firsthand what poverty means. So that experience working with this People's Bank really opened my eye into the real poverty situation in my country. So the interest to do something in this area was a no-brainer. So this is how I got interested in poverty issues and international development as a broader platform.
I would ask you to look at your crystal ball, because we've just been, what I would like you to do is to just a little bit give us a comparison of both countries, Japan and Nigeria, because as we know, Nigeria is a very young country. The percentage of old people in Nigeria is very small. For example, people that are 65 and older constitute only 6% of the Nigerian population.
Yes.
In Japan, Japan is it actually has in terms of percentages, Japan is the oldest country in the world. It has the highest percentage of old people. So
yes.
What do you see going forward? Do you think that Japan can sustain their growth economically? And what do you see for Nigeria?
Okay, so let me actually start from Nigeria. We have the opportunity to develop by virtue of the fact that we have a very youthful population. Having youthful population in itself is not the panacea for development if it is not well harnessed. So what we can do is to actually give proper education and proper training to this youthful age that we are blessed with, so that they will in turn be the engine of growth, economic growth, that we are going to experience later on. All we just need to do is to train, give them proper education, train them well, revalue our educational system that can accommodate this teeming youth that we have, because if we harness it properly, there is no end. I mean, we will be able to grow from there. But on the other hand, the youthfulness of our youth is something that can be counterproductive if it is not properly handled, because they become very restless and they can put the country into serious trouble if they are not given the proper place by training, by proper education and things like that. For Japan, yes, it's an aging society. But one thing going for them is that they were able to invest. They were able to do proper planning. And so they have all of these things in place, knowing fully well that their population is aging. Right now, they are encouraging people to have more children so that they'll be able to replenish the old ones that are falling off the cliff. But at the same time, because of their investment, which they already is at an advanced stage, they will be able to maintain some of their development that they have achieved over time. And you know what they are doing? They are actually venturing into technology. So they're using robots to do so many things that they would have ordinarily used human beings to do. So the robot technology is something that is very high in Japan, and they're using this one to make up for the aging population. And then I think there's something else that Japan is doing that I'm just trying to remember now. Okay, they're encouraging people. They are paying people to actually have children, and they are now opening up their economy to attract immigrants, especially from their region. It used to be that Japan was very closed, and they didn't open their economy that much for other people to come and invest and then come and work. But now, knowing fully well that the population is aging, there's this thing that they do now. They get nurses from the Philippines and Indonesia. So this is one of the ways they intend to cope with the aging population, opening up their economy to immigrants, using technologies, mechanizing so many of the jobs that would have been done by people. And I don't know how far this could take them, but these are some of the strategies that they are using.
I am aware that you obtained your bachelor's degree in history. And I'm sure that we'll both agree that there is no course of study that does not involve some history. So I'll ask you to actually take us on a history lesson, because I do know that as far back as the early 70s, when people looked, the economic models that looked at countries in the world that we're going to take the next leap in development, they were thinking of South Korea, Malaysia, and Nigeria. So the question then is, what happened to Nigeria that we are now in a place where you and many other people are describing Nigeria as a country in a state of extreme poverty?
Yeah, it's so sad when you look at the development of certain countries like you just mentioned, Korea, even Indonesia, which is a country that I would really want to compare with Nigeria. Mind you, no two countries are exactly the same in terms of other things like the population, the resources, the technology, or something like that. But there are some countries that share almost the same characteristics. And in that case, I will want to pick Indonesia particularly, because in terms of population, they have a population of about 255 million people, and then 47.2, I guess, of whom live below the national poverty line. So in the past 2 decades, 1 out of 5 Indonesians now belongs to middle class. And they are riding commodity boom. Like Nigeria, they had rich natural resources, which include logging, palm oil, coal, gold, and I think copper. So an adult literacy rate in Indonesia is 95.38%. So what, if you compare that to Nigeria, what is the adult literacy rate in Nigeria? It's hovering around 60 something, mid 60%. So you look at it from what the government of Indonesia were able to do. They improve on their education and they improve on their, that means that human resources was good. And then in the case of Nigeria, we have an economy that was now actually dependent solely on oil. And because the economy was dependent on oil, it abandoned every other source of income. I'm going to get to that later, how that has crystallized into our poverty situation. So you see, the policies that countries make determine whether they go out of poverty or not. And let me also tell you, Ohiro, it is not as if Nigeria has not been tuning out different poverty development strategies from, I will take you back to the 70s or so. Nigeria has always been thinking about poverty, but what happened is that these poverty alleviation strategies, one way or the other, started from the trickle-down economic theory of once the economic growth improves, it's going to trickle down and lift people that is under up. That was the first type of economic development that Nigeria thought would be able to lift people out of poverty. But what happens? They focus on rural development, forgetting that they were also poor in the urban areas. And now, after this set of strategy, they now went on. Historically, let me just give you some of the strategies that we used. We went on to look at programs like Operation Feed the Nation in 1996, I guess. And then there was this River Basin Development Authority, Agricultural Development Programs, ADP. These were the kind of program Nigeria started with in terms of lifting people up, agricultural credit guarantee scheme, rural electrification scheme, and then in 1982, we went on to talk about Green Revolution. But all of these programs didn't seem to make any significant dent on poverty. What happened is the structural adjustment program came in. And through the structural adjustment program, the budgets for education, health sector, and all of those things were cut, significantly reduced, and people started bleeding economically. So now the government came again to introduce multi-sectoral approach through programs like Directorate of Food, Road, Infrastructure, DFRI. There was also this NDE, National Directorate of Employment, Better Life for Rural Women, that targeted women in the rural area. And that was also the time they set up the People's Bank of Nigeria to provide loans to the less privileged member of the society who had no collateral to obtain loans from the conventional bank. And there was things like family support, and they set up primary health scheme. The programs were many: nomadic education, federal mass transit program. All of these were aimed at reducing poverty. I'm not sure that Nigeria has been short of strategies, but the only thing that went wrong was, maybe I will talk about what went wrong later on. I know it's going to be a follow-up question, I trust you. But these were the kind of, I'm just taking you around the historical part of how these programs have been going on. Other countries did something different. I don't know the specific program, but what I know is that compared to countries like Korea, of course, we are so different in terms of the heterogeneity of the country. But Indonesia, with a large population, is the one I'm very confident to compare ourselves with. They had some strategies that helped them, and education was one of them. And of course, we are going to talk about the other factors later on, which will include bad governance and all of those stuff.
Well, thank you very much. It's interesting what has happened in Nigeria. But have all of these strategies worked? If not, why haven't they worked? Could it be, for example, that with changes in government, there was no continuity, or that they just were not fit for the culture? For example, when you talk about the trickle-down approach, which is really based on, some sort of trickle-down economic, some, ideas of trickle-down economics. And we know that when all boats rise, people get left behind. When many boats rise, and very often there's only a few boats that rise. But I just want to know about these various strategies. Why has it been that they haven't really worked to the extent that we can say they were expected to work?
Yes, I think, like I said before, it is not as if the government have not been bringing out or churning out poverty reduction strategies. But the one problem that was very, very clear was the fact that some of these programs lack proper targeting mechanism. So most of the programs were not directly targeted at the poor. You see, the poor is not a monolithic group. They are at different levels. Now, there are the hardcore poor, otherwise known as poorest of the poor, who are at the lowest level of the poverty ladder. Then there are the better off poor or middle poor, the poor who are almost exiting the poverty class. So, for instance, take a program like microcredit, the People's Bank. If you target the poorest of the poor with microfinance opportunity, it's a misplaced strategy, because the poorest of the poor may not even have any kind of business that will be that they will invest the credit that they get from the bank from. So what they are interested in is survival. So if you were going to target any strategy on those poorest of the poor, you want to be looking at social infrastructure. You want to be looking at giving them employment to build infrastructure and then paying them for them to consume or to. I was talking about the poor targeting mechanism and the fact that most of these programs were not properly targeted. It's just like targeting the credit to the poorest of the poor, who may not necessarily make maximum use of the credit that they receive from People's Bank. And I think the next point I would like to mention, you have already hinted on already, which is the politicization of some of this program. What happened is that when there's political instability often leads to discontinuation of programs. Succeeding governments, if different from the one program, do not want to continue with the existing program because they think that the credit for that program would be given to the administration that actually started it. Whereas if the program was good, what they needed to do was to continue, evaluate that program and see if there are areas they wish to improve on. But what happened is they just push it aside and set up their own new programs. And then another issue was actually in the area of monitoring, accountability, and transparency, because the programs were actually seen as a means of sharing national cake. So programs like Free and Better Life cut across all the sectors and appears to stretch their activities and resources too thin to make any significant difference. So that's one of the things that went wrong. And then I would also like to say that some of these programs did not have proper means of evaluation or assessment. So without proper assessment, there was not going to be any way of knowing if the program was successful or not.
Right. Are there any other social factors that tend to foster poverty in a society like Nigeria? I ask that because just to be very honest about the fact that we are both from Nigeria and we know what's going on there. How is it that the more religious Nigeria has become, the poorer it appears that people have become? And then I hear people say, the Lord said, the poor will remain with us forever. But then you see how the society is really going the direction it's going. So is there a way in your area of work and study to understand the trend in Nigeria now? And while you're at that discussion, is it also possible for you to just tell us what sectors of the Nigerian society are more, if you look at the demographics, what sections of those demographics are more affected by the poverty level?
Yes, I wouldn't say that we have a culture of laziness, but what I would say is that there is this thing that the religious people try to teach the people about the fact that once you pray very hard, no matter what your problems are, God is going to take care of it. Make no mistake, I believe in prayers. But prayer without work is not going to take you out of poverty. It's not going to just ordinarily put food on your table. The era of manna, it's gone. So people need to really actually stand up and be more involved in lifting themselves out of poverty by working. That's from that point of view. And I also want to let you know that even in terms of education, I think the thing that the government should actually do is to look into our educational system, for example, and see, why do we have to put emphasis on only university education? What happens to vocational programs? Is it a time for us to now think of how to think about those? Not everybody can go to university. Why don't you train people in plumbing, people, electricians, people in the trade? Like in Canada here, people in these professions, they actually, many of them, if they have the Red Sea, what happens? They earn more than even a master's degree holder. But in our own country, we tend to downplay that kind of education. The only person who goes to learn how to repair a car is the child who is an orphan and is living with his uncle. So he said, okay, you know what? You can't go to school. Even without going to elementary school, they throw him out to go and learn how to fix cars. Whereas these kind of trade are better off, you are able to succeed better if you had that basic education. then I want to really talk about this from my experience too, to tell you that if you look at the difference between the educational standard in the southern part of Nigeria and in the northern part of Nigeria, you will see there is a big gap. Now, what gives people, I don't know what gives people the impression that it's only when you have your education in English language, that's when you are regarded as literate. I am sure if the educational system in the northern part of Nigeria can be restructured in such a way that they even study in their language, Hausa language, you can be a doctor studying in your language. After all, how many Japanese speak English? What about the Asian countries? They don't even speak a word of English, yet they are able to go into their educational standard and rise to any level. So there's something that we can do to bring up the northern part, allow them or give them the option to study in their language. And when they finish, they can become doctors there. There's no problem. You don't really have to study in English. So these social factors, either in education or in the cultural values or areas that has to do with even health, because a child who is hungry cannot even stay and take lectures in the class. So as rich as, up till now in Japan, the government provide meals, at least, to students or children from elementary school grade 1 to grade 9. So a child who knows that he's going to eat at school, there's nothing stopping him from wanting to go to school, which is an encouragement. So these are things that the government, these are some of the social factors, socioeconomic factors that we need to consider in if we really want to make a significant dent on poverty in Nigeria. And then you asked the other question, which was, I have forgotten now, if you want to remind me. Okay, the sectors. Now, the poverty in Nigeria is not the same across the whole country. It is more, the poverty rate in the north is higher than that of the south. If you look at in terms of gender, you will also discover that household with female head, it has a higher poverty rate than household that are headed by males. So what about rural and urban? Poverty in the rural area is higher than poverty in the urban area. So there are these disparities that need to be taken care of if the government is actually going to make any significant dent, because first among male and female, region by region, urban and rural. And you also discover that actually even within the female-headed household, a female-headed household that is having a primary education or even post-secondary education has a lower poverty rate. So all put together, education is vital if we have to do this issue of reducing poverty among the regions, among the gender, and then among the other subgroups.
Well, I was going to ask you about your recommendations, but you have actually discussed your recommendations within the answers that you have provided to each of the questions that I have asked. So what I'm going to ask you instead, as a way of ending this, is just one simple question. Is there hope?
Ohiro, there is hope. First of all, one thing I want to say is that there is no country in the world where there is no poverty. There is no country in the world where you can actually alleviate poverty completely. However, countries are doing their utmost best to reduce poverty. In Nigeria, we can't do something. There is hope. It's not a hopeless situation. There is one point I'm actually trying to forget, but I just remember. That is, we also need to do something about our population. If we don't control our population, no matter what we do, it's going to be very difficult. I know that there are countries that are more than Nigeria that are reducing poverty, like in China, like in India, but at least we need to do something about our population. And we also need to do something by letting the private sector take part in this poverty reduction strategy. It's not about government. Yes, government has to play a predominant role. They have to set up the right atmosphere and put up the policies, but private sectors can assist. Individually, we can assist by just not looking at the government to provide everything. The private sector also need to play a role. So there is hope. There's no way. The man who loses hope is the man who dies. The only thing is that we need to look at what works. We need to look at our data. That's a country that even sometimes most of our data are even faulty to be able to know how to do proper planning. But once we put all of these things in place, it may not be drastic, but at least we'll be heading in this right direction. Put simply, the hope is still there. We can do something.
Right. Except that the hope cannot be realized without action, is what you're saying.
Exactly. That's true.
Right, which means that in a country where people depend so much on government and expect government to take the lead, one would also expect that it has to be, that part of the hope would have to be that Nigerians elect into leadership people with foresight who are also serious enough to do some of the things that you're saying.
Yes, you made my point. Because one other area is bad governance. The country is such that if you really want to progress, there should be leaders, visionary leaders who set the pace. But what we have is bad governance, corruption. And what happens in many developed countries, people don't go into leadership position to amass wealth. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, the best way you can be rich is to take part in politics. So there are professional politicians who do not have any other address. Since they were born, the only thing they know how to do is to play politics. Even if they are 79, 89, they never have any other job. In the United States, if you really want to make money, go into the private sector. Same thing here in Canada and some other country, but Nigeria, that is the only way you can amass wealth. And not, you go there, because of the level of poverty, you take advantage of the people. When it is time for election, you go give them 1,000 naira and something like that. You pay them up front. And then when you get in there, you do your own agenda. So these are things, this bad governance. How do we hold our leaders accountable? We cannot, because they already paid the electorate before they were appointed or before they were elected. So until we are able to elect leaders who have visions, people who really have the interests of the ordinary people at heart, then no matter what the program is, no matter what other people are doing around them, it's not going to be easy. The actions that we just enumerated throughout this discussion may not see the light of day until there are people who really want to say, you know what, this is time to take the people who put us in this position at heart instead of our own self-interest and the interest of our children that are not yet born.
That seems like a very strong point on which to end this conversation. So, Joe, I'd like to thank you very much for coming, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. I look forward to having further discussions with you on this subject because, just thinking back to the way that we started, just as nations should not and cannot stand on the side, because that's what international development is all about. They cannot be non-aligned. We as individuals should consider ourselves as having no option but to do things that need to be done to lift up our communities, to lift up our countries. I thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you for the computer glitch here and there, and it's one of those days. And please feel free to have me on your program again to share some thoughts on some other issues, and I'll be very pleased to be part of what you are doing. And thank you. I know it takes a lot of effort to get different people participate in your program. I watched most of your programs, and I'm really happy you're doing a good job.
You shouldn't just watch most, you should watch all of them. and get other people to watch them too. But thank you very much. I look forward to further conversations with you.
Thanks for having me.
You have watched my interview with Dr. Joseph Unufegan of the University of Toronto in Canada, in which we had an extensive conversation about poverty alleviation strategies in Nigeria. I hope you learned something from the conversation. Therefore, I urge you to please push the subscribe button and subscribe to my channel on YouTube. I also invite you to go to www.ruminations.org and read my blog articles. In addition, I request you to visit Apple iTunes, or just go to Google and type in Ruminations with Ohiro Oni-Eseleh and listen to my podcasts. And when you do that, and when you read my blog articles, and when you watch this on YouTube or whatever platform, wherever you watch this, also please subscribe everywhere. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the next time.